these the past 2 years, we've noticed because of the situation with DACA, there has been a lot of students who have been graduating high school with no DACA. And yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
Anna, do you want to add to that piece?
No, I think this is pretty straightforward in terms of who's graduating every year, right? And so I think it's really notable, even just right now, kind of looking at the list of all of you who are in this academy, right, or who signed up for this program. The vast majority of you are transfer students. So I think it's also very clear that, especially because of the pandemic, right, we're seeing a shift of students. One, they are graduating from high school at a much higher rate compared to like 10 years ago. But at the same time, we are seeing them going either straight to a community college or just not enrolling whatsoever, right? And in the last 2 years have been a huge influence in that. And we're only going to see even we're more than likely going to see a decline in incoming freshmen in the next couple of years once unfortunately, right, we hit that recession, because it's coming. And so one of the things that 2008 taught us is that a lot of people were returning to school. That's around the time that I graduated from high school. And so we're going to see just some shifts in numbers, but I think it's really important to highlight that our graduating freshmen, or graduating high school seniors are not graduating with DACA. They're not graduating with any pathway towards work permits. And as long as DACA stays as it is right now, we're probably not going to see any solutions through that program itself. And Evelyn brought up a really important point too, that the United States, throughout the last 20 years, as they've been introducing different types of federal solutions for immigration relief, high school graduation tends to be a clear clause, right, for qualifying for those immigration relief programs, if they were to happen. And so I think for many of our youth, this is kind of like a ticket, right, to be able to qualify for those opportunities, if those opportunities open up down the line. And of course, my personal mindset as well is that you get a degree here in the United States, right? That degree is going to have a lot of value anywhere you go. And so get your US degree, right? You have the resources, because no one can take away that degree. No one can take away your education. And so I think for me, like, just having an education in the United States is very valuable if you can afford it, and if you find it to be valuable as well. Obviously, higher education is not the only way that you can be successful and generate income in the US. But yeah, we'll stick to the topic of higher education because that's where all of us are at right now. All right, go ahead, Evelyn.
All right. And so undocumented students accessing higher education. There has been approximately 75,000 undocumented students being enrolled in a California public higher education system. So meaning community colleges, the CSUs or UCs. And only 5 to 10% of the undocumented high school students or those who graduate from high school continue their education. So tying it with what Anna was just talking about. And so we see that, again, 4 out of 5 undocumented students in California are enrolled in community colleges. And so we see that the numbers are still kind of there, but we are seeing that a lot of students are graduating high school and either pursuing higher education or not pursuing it at all. And so I think now, as for personal experience, I've seen a lot of my friends graduate high school, and yeah, it's either you do go or you don't. And I think one of the things that is very misleading now with not having the opportunity to qualify for DACA is that most students get that confused. Like, if I don't have DACA, if I don't have a work permit, I can't go to a 4-year or community college. And so I think there's certain things that need to be talked about, and educate oneself onto these policies and what they mean. Because if we want to continue with our education, I think it's definitely possible. And DACA is not a requirement for that.
And we're going to talk more about that right now in the next upcoming slides. Any questions or any reactions to what you're seeing so far? No. All right. Feel free to use the chat. Okay. Thank you, Evelyn. So now we're going to talk about immigration policy, right, in the United States. And so I'm a little history nerd, and when it comes to immigration policy, I really do enjoy kind of understanding how did we get to where we are at. And so for me, what's really important to start off with is just understanding when was the first time that the United States ever even talked about undocumented student rights in education. And so I want to first start off with kind of defining what scholars have seen to be the role of education settings when it comes to immigrants, right? And so there are a lot of research that talk about the role of schools. And in the United States, schools have served as a vehicle, as a tool to integrate citizens into the broader society, right? And so when we're thinking about incoming or new arrivals, schools are really the first place where you start interacting with people who don't come from the same backgrounds as you, right? School might have been the first place where you learned about voting. Maybe that was the first time you learned about what do the 50 stars of the United States flags represent, right? And so educational settings, their responsibility is to ensure that we're integrating all of our youth into this society, right? That we teach them how to be civically engaged, how to be civically responsible. And, being able to facilitate that engagement between just being a citizen and being able to influence the way that we show up for each other in our society. And so in the 70s, so I'm going to give you a little history here. In the 70s, Texas, right? Because we all love Texas and everything they stand for nowadays. But Texas had passed a state law in the mid 70s that allowed counties to decide how do they want to treat undocumented students in K through 12. And so some counties decided to charge folks a small fee for being out-of-state student, for lack of better, not lack of better terms, but like to not use the terms that they were using. Others were given the options to just not allow undocumented children to enroll in K through 12 at all. And so in the 80s, in the late 70s, that law was challenged. And essentially the Supreme Court took it on and they decided in this case called Plyler versus Doe, Plyler versus being the individual that is pushing for there to be more restrictions as to who can access K through 12, and Doe, of course, being the people that are being affected by it. Basically, Justice William at the time said that it is our responsibility for every county, every district, it is our responsibility to educate and ensure that we are integrating all of our youth because they are citizens of this world, regardless of immigration status. And in 1982, Plyler versus Doe first established that it is the responsibility of K through 12 to educate every single citizen, regardless of immigration status, right? Again, citizens of the world, citizens of humanity. And so Plyler versus Doe has been really, really instrumental in upholding some of the laws that we have now. So I want to make sure that we go back to Plyler versus Doe. So yeah, I'm not going to go over all of it. I just kind of summarize what it was. And so if y'all are ever writing a paper around education access and undocumented students or immigrant students, Plyler versus Doe is a place to start. Okay, So in the last 20 years, a lot has been happening when it comes to immigration. And so, well, I'm not going to go into every single little thing. I kind of want to give you a snapshot as to like what has been happening since Plyler versus Doe, right? Again, Plyler versus Doe took place in 1982. So in this timeline, you're going to notice two colors, yellow and blue. The headers with the blue are the state laws that we've been seeing that support undocumented students, and the ones in yellow are some of the federal laws or reforms that have happened that have had some sort of impact as well on undocumented students in California. So in 82, again, we're talking about Plyler versus Doe. And in 1986, so in the 80s, again, there's a huge shift in the United States. 1986 is the last time we ever saw a federal immigration reform being passed. And this was under Republican Governor Ronald Reagan, right? And so a lot of our colleagues or our peers that are first generation or second generation Mexican American whose parents were able to benefit from the reform, these are Reagan babies, and I love it. And so in 1986 in California, we saw the challenge of this network called the Leticia A network that were really pushing California to establish rules that allowed undocumented youth to be considered in-state students. And so before AB 540 was AB 540, there was the Leticia A network. And the Leticia A network were a group of folks, educators and students that were really just going out there and educating one another about what are the rights of an undocumented student to declare in-state tuition. Right, back then you were able to use a 1 year, 1 day rule in California to be able to do that. And so in 1986, a group of students and organizers by the name of Leticia A started organizing behind that and really trying to push the Supreme Court here in Alameda County to make it law that undocumented people should be able to declare in-state tuition. In the 90s, that was challenged by an actual UC staff member that basically said, we should be implementing federal law. And so in the 90s, Leticia A was challenged, and unfortunately in 1992, it was overturned. So between 1992 and 2000, undocumented students were being treated as out-of-state students. So they were being asked to pay out-of-state tuition. There was no laws that would allow them to pay in-state tuition. And so during that time between the 90s and in the 90s, right, we also saw a lot of things happening in California. In 96, at the federal level, the reform that President Bill Clinton passed basically made it more difficult for undocumented people to access resources and benefits. It also established law that you have to be able to provide resources and benefits to U.S. citizens first and foremost before providing those same benefits to someone who's undocumented. That's essentially what Bradford was arguing. Like, why are we allowing undocumented people to qualify for in-state tuition when out-of-state U.S. citizens are not allowed that same privilege? Right. And so that's taking us now to 2001 and AB 540 that is supposed to address that question, right? Like, what law do we need to create to allow undocumented students to qualify for in-state tuition, right? Because again, between 1990 and 2000, they were very clear that undocumented students could not be treated as in-state students. Again, 2001, right? Gray Davis was still governor. This is right before the governor came into place, which was our last Republican governor. And so in 2001, the Leticia A network really started organizing behind establishing state law that would benefit undocumented students just as much. It will benefit U.S. citizens. And so we'll go over those technicalities in a bit, but it's important to write this down, not write this down, but take note of it. Now, one thing I didn't include in this timeline is what was happening after 2001 at the federal level. And one thing that's important to note is that since 2001, the federal government has passed like 11 different versions of the Federal Dream Act. So at the federal level, we're seeing this push to try to come up with some sort of pathway for legal relief And at the state level, we're seeing organizers say like, hey, we need access to education right now. There's things that the state can do. And so we saw AB 540, and then it's in the following years, and you can see like there's a huge gap, like a 10-year gap, right? We see things like the California Dream Act, the California Dream Loan, AB 2000, which is an expansion of AB 540, and SB 68, which is another expansion of AB 540. At the same time, in 2012, we see this new mandate being passed by President Obama, thanks to organizers, not because of the president, not because of any, kind, generous soul at the government level, but because undocumented people were demanding a stop to the deportation of innocent people that were not committing any crimes except existing while undocumented. And so DACA came on board as a temporary option to relieve people from unjust deportations. And so since then, we really haven't seen anything at the federal level. We've seen different versions of it, but I just kind of want to give you like a timeline of what has been happening in the last 20 years, right? And also recognizing a lot of these things that you're dealing with right now, they're pretty new. Like these are the last 20 years, right? I say 20, it's pretty new because I've been living through some of these. I'm clearly older than you all, but like, this is recent history, right? And so I want to paint this picture for you all too, to kind of take it in and reflect on that. Any thoughts or any comments? I don't know, Evelyn, anything you'd like to add on?
I think it's pretty interesting to see how many people have navigated higher education prior to all of these things that we have now. So I think we're very fortunate to have what we have, and definitely take advantage of the policies that we have now.
Yeah.
And I think Mario has a comment.
Yeah, so I'm not that much older than you. I actually came to the States about 2002. So I've been through this whole entire transition. I didn't really start going to school until like really dig into school until 2015. I started at the community college at Evergreen around 2012. And I'm noticing that the financial aid available, especially for the community colleges, has expanded so much. It's unbelievable compared to how it was 10 years ago. The amount of resources available, the counseling, the different paths to going about paying for school has changed. Because I'm going through it now as an older student. Like, it's awesome.
Thank you, Mario, for sharing that. Yeah, it's incredible to just be able to see how much things have changed. Although we have a long way to go, we still have a long way to go. So I have another comment here. Someone shared, is it true there's been a pause to new DACA applications? Yes, there has been a pause. And I can share a little bit more later on, and certainly we'll have some more time to talk to ILD and ask those questions directly to immigration attorneys. But yes, at the moment, DACA applications are not being processed for first-time applicants. It's not that you can't submit one, you can certainly submit it, but they're not going to process it. And so we might know a little bit more on what happens to DACA in the next few months. So certainly before the end of the 2022 year. Yeah. Any other reactions? All right. Okay. So let's talk about some of these laws and some of these policies that you're seeing right here, right? Okay. So this is a really brief overview. So Evelyn had mentioned earlier that one of the things we've noticed is how students interpret their status, right? And how it informs their perception of what they're able to qualify for and what they have access to. And so terminology is really, really important to us because of that same reason, that depending on what you qualify for, or depending on the policy that you're talking about, may mean that you qualify for something very specific. So for example, if you say I'm documented, right? Because we hear a lot, a lot of people have coined that term and, have appropriated that term for themselves to describe themselves as someone with DACA. You're documented, but you have DACA. You're not really documented, but you're not really undocumented either. And so sometimes I hear students say like, oh, I'm DACA, do I qualify for financial aid? And so to me, I like to take a step back because DACA has nothing to do with financial aid, right? DACA has more to do with you being able to have work authorization. It has more to do with you being able to, what's it called? Gain advanced parole if you're able to, or be able to access opportunities that require a social security number. So to me, that's what DACA means when I hear that word. And so in this slide, I just kind of want to give you like a brief overview of some of the laws or some of the policies and what are the areas that they cover, right? So for example, pathways towards residency and immigration relief, that would be the Federal DREAM Act. And again, the Federal DREAM Act, there has been like 11 versions of that. The last one was introduced in 2019, and we haven't really seen anything move forward since then, for obvious reasons with the pandemic and everything that's been going on. So that's the last time we've seen the Federal DREAM Act being introduced, or a version of the Federal DREAM Act. Liminal immigration status, and liminal immigration status, or liminal immigration, is a term that has been coined by researchers that talks about this in-between legality, right? Where it's like, again, you're not necessarily undocumented because you have some sort of legal protections or certain privileges that usually come with being having a work permit or a social security number. But at the same time, those protections are very limited, right? Like, unfortunately, it doesn't pave a pathway towards a permanent residency. So when we talk about liminal immigration status, we're talking about deferred action like DACA, or temporary protective status like TPS, or any other status that provides an EAD or an employment authorization document. And so that's what we mean when we're talking about these terms. At the state level, I've divided this up, and this is not everything. Let me tell you, state level has so many different laws. I cannot name all of them, but I'm going to show you where to find some of this information. But this is kind of the key stuff that I'd like to focus on. So for California in-state tuition, right, we're working with laws like AB 540, AB 2000, and SB 68. AB and SB, they just stand for Assembly Bill, which is, Assembly is like the house where the bill was first birthed, for lack of a better term. So like in the Assembly House, an assembly member was the one that came up with AB 540. SB means that the Senate, someone at the Senate, the state Senate, came up with this bill. So that's all that means, AB and SB. At the state financial aid level, we have AB 130 and AB 131, pretty much known as the California DREAM Act. It's composed of two bills, and I'll go a little bit into detail with that. And of course, SB 1210, which is the DREAM Law. At the professional and occupational licensings, there are many laws around that, but there are laws in the state of California that protect the students' right to be able to apply for professional licenses using ITINs instead of social security number. And student privacy, there are state laws, and FERPA is the only federal law in this group that protects your privacy as a student. Okay, so I have a couple questions in the chat. Let me go ahead and read them out loud. Okay. Actually, no, one. As a current student, are we available to get a student visa? No. So you have to be abroad before you can request a student visa, and it also comes with other requirements. But we can certainly talk more in detail one-on-one to see like what are other pathways. And so the immigration attorneys that we work with would be like a really great resource for that, because they can go over like what are other alternative pathways towards residency. But unfortunately, like once you are here in the United States, the student visa process doesn't really apply to you anymore. And also, when you hear the term international student, we're talking about students with an F1 visa. So you might be called, you might be called an international student because of the lack of immigration status, but technically you're just there's a term for this. What's it called? your DACA, not your DACA, but your AB 540 application has this non-resident something. Remind me, Evelyn, you probably, anyways, but there's all these different terms that we use, but essentially when it comes to understanding what an international student is, we're looking specifically to someone with an F1 student visa, right? If you came to the US with an active visa, and you happen to overstay your visa and that visa is no longer active, then you no longer have a visa. That would be the way that we would interpret that as well. Again, if I sound a little cruel, please, I apologize. I just want to be very blunt and honest with some of these things. And I feel like as an undocumented person, I know I would appreciate someone just telling me things as they are. And so I just want to make sure that, please, don't take the way that I say things, personal. I just want to, again, just make sure that we're having honest conversations about what this all means. Okay, thank you though. All right. So let's talk about AB 540, right? So AB 540 was passed in 2001. And so AB 540, the original version of AB 540 stated that you have to have graduated from a California high school for 3 years and having attended it for 3 years or more. And so when we say 3 years, we mean 3 full years. We don't mean 2.1 years or 2.5 years. I've seen cases where students arrive to the US like halfway into their junior year of high school and go to a community college, and the community college would qualify that 1.5 years in high school as 3 years, right? And so when they transfer over to the CSU or the UC, they would realize, no, like the UC and the CSU are looking for the same specific numbers, specific definitions, and they're very literal with what the requirements are. And so since then, those requirements have been expanded. And so students have been able to not just use 3 full years of attendance at a California high school, but they've been able to also combine the 3-year equivalent. So using the example of a student who maybe attended high school for 1.5 years and completed their GED during that 1.5 years or their high school degree, they can also use K through 12 to combine into those 3 years. And it may sound funny as to like, well, why would someone need to do that? And the reason why is that sometimes students leave California and go to another state and then come back. And so to be able to tap into like how long you live in California as a child and how long you attended California high school can actually benefit more US citizens and permanent residents than it actually benefits undocumented people. This is why we have AB 540, because it actually benefits US citizens more than it benefits undocumented people. It just allowed undocumented folks to be included in an opportunity that would make college more accessible. And so it's not perfect, because we do recognize that there are students that don't qualify for the requirements because maybe they didn't know that there was a pathway. And so when it came to like something like SB 68, which was passed in 2018, it's the most recent one, that actually allowed students who were maybe older, who came in as adults, maybe went straight to community college. And so that, so SB 68 would allow folks to use up to 3 years of community college, right? 2 of those years being college credit courses, and 1 of the years being adult school or non-college credit courses, to be able to transfer over and be able to declare in-state tuition. And so that definition has expanded significantly. And I'm pretty sure some of you right now are still trying to figure out, okay, how do I show that I qualify for this? And one of the things about this form, so the form that you have to fill out, I know Evelyn dropped it in the chat. So thank you for dropping it here. Let me show it in the screen real quick. So you're going to be hearing people talking about this form using different language. Some of you may have heard the term affidavit. So maybe you came to know this document as an AB 540 affidavit. Here in the last few years, we just know it as a California non-resident tuition exemption request. Mouthful. And so the affidavit, as I like to call it, is basically this promissory note where you're telling the university like, hey, I get it, I'm undocumented, but I can show you that I attended, California high school, or like I completed these requirements through my transcripts. But if there is ever an opportunity for me to fix my status, I promise you I will fix it, right? And so that's all you're doing when you're signing this paper. It's no contract that you have to fix your status. I mean, if that were the case, then man, that would be great. We can give everyone, a pathway towards residency. But it's just a promissory note. Again, you're just telling them, if I do have the opportunity to fix my status, I'll do it. But you don't have to. And I say this because I know some folks have decided to just take their degrees to another country. And so, but we'll have those conversations. Again, I'm just kind of throwing ideas out here. All right. Any questions about the non-resident tuition exemption form or AB 540? All right, no questions about this one. So everyone's submitting it? Yes, okay. All right, well, let me know if you do have any questions. So now let's talk about, where do we turn it in? Great question. So let me show you, I'm going to give you the link to our website. So the Office of the Registrar is the office that oversees the non-resident tuition exemption form or anything related to residency. Let me drop the link to our website here. But on our website, you'll find an FAQ with some of those details, including where to submit the form. And so you'll find that information here. You can submit it electronically by using DocuSign, which you have access to by using your SJSU credentials. And it's also like a really great way for you to keep track of what you've submitted and have some sort of like digital footprint of when you submitted all of that. So you just have to log in using your SJSU password and student ID. Okay, so just drop the chat. Any other questions regarding this form? Okay, so, and I didn't type that in here, I should have, but the other policy that is really important to understand is the California Dream Act, right? So I am hoping that all of you who qualify, or you know that you qualify, that you submitted your California Dream Act. So the California Dream Act is divided into two bills, AB 130 and AB 131. AB 130 was implemented first. It actually rolled out before AB 131 rolled out. And AB 130 basically allowed universities to be able to fundraise for undocumented students. I remember when I was in college, like we couldn't even apply to internal scholarships. If someone wanted to donate money to support an undocumented student, the university would have to tell them, no, we can't give that to them, right? So AB 130 pretty much gave universities permission to take that money and give it to an undocumented student, as long as they qualify for AB 540, although we've learned how to navigate around some of that stuff. So we will talk more about that. But later on, AB 131, which was implemented a year later, that was a meatier part of the law, which essentially established state aid and university aid for students who qualified for AB 540. So in order for you to qualify for the California Dream Act, this is what you also have to qualify for. So right now, if, say, for example, you submit your California Dream Act, but your money hasn't rolled out or you're still being charged out of state, this has to be submitted and approved before you can see the money from this one. We're going to be talking more about financial aid tomorrow. So we're going to go over some of those really clear examples, but I just wanted to, make it a point that to get this, you need this, right? You don't need this to get this, right? But as an undocumented person, you want to make sure you get both. Any questions? Yeah. All right, it's 1:30. I'm pretty sure some of y'all are tired, but bear with me here. Okay, so now let's talk about professional and occupational licenses. One of the things that I've been encountering a lot, and actually I just had a conversation with some faculty, some professors yesterday, is around what can a student do who's undocumented if they don't have an ITIN to get a professional license? And the thing about California, again, is that we've worked so hard here to figure out how to open up opportunities, that we've learned that in order for us to be able to get professional licenses, we don't have to have a social security number, right? Like, your immigration status doesn't define if you're able to like learn these things and be able to apply these things. So a lot of professional licensing boards now accept ITINs. They actually have to by state law. And subsequent, like also as well at the same time, if you need to do a background check, right? Say, for example, you're in a major, like, because I know we have some CHAD majors here. So one of the things about childhood development is that major requires you to do service learning, meaning that you have to do some sort of volunteer. And so a lot of students who don't have a social security number are concerned that they can't do the community service, or so either they will change majors or just kind of like not do this requirement until like it gets to the very, very end of the rope and they can no longer, push this out. And so what's really important to note is that in California, you can't use an ITIN to do a background check, right? You don't have to have a social security number. And so there are laws that protect you to access these opportunities. Usually the barriers or the challenges is paying for these things, right? So paying for your school, paying for your tuition. But whether you can practice these things in California, yes, you can. Like, there are undocumented lawyers in California, there are undocumented doctors in California, there are undocumented accountants, right? Like, again, you can do this in the state of California, which is a really great thing too. One of the great reasons to live in the state, right? To be able to do some of these things. Any questions? All right, so this is just an example. And then of course, student privacy. These are the three main laws or policies that we hold on to when talking about privacy and how we protect our student data at the CSU. Because again, I want to recognize that right now, as you're coming into the university, you're being asked to disclose, and for most of you for the very first time, about your immigration status. And that can be scary, right? Like, I don't know you, why do you need to know this? They may be asking for your parents' immigration status. And so it's all for the purposes of in-state tuition and being able to determine what kind of resources or what kind of financial aid you can access, or even what kind of cost would apply to you. And so, but at the same time, we recognize in a digital world, it's so easy to, to make data and information accessible to other groups. And so we do have very clear laws that we have to follow, starting off with FERPA. So as a student, you are all protected by FERPA. That means that we cannot share any information, any identifiable information with any third source or any third party without your consent. Even within the university, we cannot share information, even unless there is written consent from you, or if it's for educational purposes. So for example, like, if you call me and you tell me like, hey, Anna, I need, financial aid information, but I don't have time right now. Can you do this for me with financial aid? Financial aid might not let me make a decision for you because, again, under FERPA, there's certain limitations, but they might be able to share with me like, hey, yeah, no, the student has a financial aid packet, or like the student actually didn't complete this. And so that's educational, information that I need for educational reasons. But they're not going to tell me, oh, this is how much money they're coming in with, or this is what their parents make. They won't give me any of that, even if I were to ask it. Not that I need it, but I just want to kind of give you an example of the ways that we protect your information and the type of information that we are okay with sharing with one another when needed. And then at the state level, there are two laws. There's SB 54, or otherwise known as the California Values Act, which essentially detangles immigration enforcement from police departments. At least it's supposed to do that, right? We do know that, depending on the county that you're in, it will also depend how the local police department collaborates with ICE. But on our campus, we have very clear expectations that one, we will not be, collaborating with ICE. We will not provide them with any information, even if they ask for it. And even furthermore, AB 21, which is a state law that mandates that the CSU, the UC, and the community colleges has a plan to ensure the protection of our undocumented students' data and information. And so I wanted to highlight these ones because I want to make sure that you know what your rights are. And if you ever feel like your rights have been violated, this is what you can turn to. Any questions?
Anna, I believe we have 2 questions in the chat.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, thank you, Evelyn. So one of the questions is, would we still be able to apply for AB 130, AB 131, or was there a deadline for those? So AB 130 and AB 131 is basically the California Dream Act. I'm just dividing the California Dream Act into the actual bills, but you just need to fill out the California Dream Act, and it's qualifying for all of it. AB 130 just basically gives us permission to be able to fundraise and be able to develop scholarships. So this applies more to the universities, while AB 131 applies more to you as a student in terms of whatever you're able to apply from the state during its during its timeline, right? And so the priority window for financial aid is October 1st through March 2nd every year, meaning every year that you want to get aid, you have to submit that request a year before, right? So by March 2nd. Now, if you miss the deadline, which could happen, it's okay, and it happens, you can still submit it. You can submit your 2022-2023 California Dream Act application even well into the last week of the last semester of that year. Will it guarantee that you will get any aid? No, but because this is pretty early on right now, and like the year hasn't started, there could be a high possibility that you will get aid if you submit your California Dream Act right now. And so if you are someone that hasn't submitted it, you don't know if you did, you still have time, even after March 2nd. It just means that by missing the March 2nd deadline, you won't be competing for other types of aid. We're going to talk more about what the California Dream Act looks like and really go into the details of that type of aid. But what's important to know, you just need one application for the California Dream Act, and it's going to look into all types of state and university aid that are available. When it comes to scholarships, that's a whole separate conversation. Scholarships, we have internal scholarships that have different deadlines, and there are also external scholarships that also have different deadlines. And so that's a whole different application outside of the California Dream Act. Of course. Thank you, Alexis. And then the other question is, what about credentials like teaching credential? Yes. So going back to professional licensing, and actually, I go into DACA, but I was going to go directly here. There's so many laws and so many things related to higher ed. Higher ed immigration portal was a portal that was released like a couple of years ago. It was under a different name. But this is pretty much my holy grail of state policies related to undocumented students from across the United States. So if you're ever curious as to like, what are the laws in Virginia, right? If you're interested in going to a master's program in the East Coast in the future, right? Like, or in another state, I think just being aware of what are the laws and protections that are offered to you as an undocumented person, depending on the state. And as you can see, all of the green states, and ironically Texas, are the most comprehensive states when it comes to undocumented students' resources. And so to the question of the professional licensings, like if you want to be a teacher, so if you go to this portal, you'll find some really cool data to be aware of, right? If this is something that you're, generally interested in or just want to explore, but you can also look into that it was going to go into some of those bills. So for some reason that you could click on here, but it doesn't look like you can, but just scroll down and you're going to be able to see like all the different policies related to in-state tuition, state financial aid. Here's the professional licenses, right? So Oh yeah, here's the one that you were asking about. Who was that? Is that Ivana? Yeah, Ivana. So Senate Bill 695, so this was in 2018, prohibits licensing boards from requiring an individual to disclose their citizenship or immigration status for the purpose of obtaining a professional licensure. So here you go. This is the law, right? And so one of the other reasons I want you to know where to find this information and where to pull from these laws is, like I said earlier, if someone ever tells you, sorry, you don't qualify because of your immigration status, pull these up, right? Like, I always say my American dream is to sue somebody and, like a company, and get millions of dollars out of them, or thousands of dollars. And so, like, not that I'm saying you sue the university, because I mean, I would get in trouble from saying that. What I'm saying is, know your rights, know that you have the legal rights to defend yourself, and to have, or like, institutions to honor your legal right to access some of these opportunities. Save this website, bookmark it on your computer, but definitely refer back to this. And then you'll also have information on driver licenses. If you are a commuter and you're driving without a license in the state of California, do know that there is a license under AB 60 that will allow you to be able to get a license even if you don't have a social security number. So check it out, learn more, just be safe out there, don't get into unnecessary trouble with the police, and also just save your money. You don't need to pay a ticket for not having a license if you're able to get that. Yeah. Any questions so far? No? Okay, so let's talk about DACA a little bit, just briefly. So we talked about DACA being a federal mandate, right? Like this liminal immigration status that it's not permanent, but it's still here 10 years later. I mean, DACA is 10 years old. It was passed in 2012. And so DACA, for the most part, is a program that is limited to certain qualifying folks, right? It's supposed to be for undocumented youth, although many of us have already graduated from the youth title. But it's open to only certain qualifying folks. You have to have arrived in the United States, within a specific time frame. And at the moment, the DACA program is in limbo, meaning that they're not processing any new applications because of a current case or a lawsuit that is pending at the in the state of Texas, which essentially is arguing that Texas is telling the United States that they need to terminate the program because it's illegal. And so right now that recently there was a hearing on that argument, so we're gonna wait to learn what's gonna happen to the program. And so again, this program can be taken away at any moment because it's a federal mandate. It's not a state law or a federal law. But I think what's important to recognize is that in these last 10 years, we've learned a lot thanks to DACA. First, we've learned that DACA, right, like having a social security number, having a work permit, has allowed people to just be able to move, like be able to gain social mobility, right? Be able to get a work permit, to be able to get a good paying job, maybe a job that provides healthcare access for the first time ever. Maybe you can benefit from retirement funds or savings that provides you. Before AB 60, right? You have access to California driver's license, and nowadays access to the Real ID through DACA. And of course, just new opportunities that are usually reserved for folks who have a social security number, like being able to travel abroad, being able to apply to a fellowship or internship, right? That's limited to certain folks. And also just like the personal gains, right? That you get from just feeling some sort of normalcy. And so DACA has shown just how much people can do if only given that chance. Now, does it mean that people haven't been able to demonstrate that without DACA? Absolutely not. Like, I think some of our most amazing and incredible leaders, undocumented leaders out there have been leaders that have created something out of absolutely nothing. And so DACA is not a perfect program. It's only benefited a small few, but it has been an opportunity for us to be able to show just how much people can contribute to the society if given the chance, right, to do it in a legal way. Will that stop us? Hell no. And so, as things change and as we continue to try to better understand what do we have access to, I invite you to check out some of these resources. So these 3 websites right here, Higher Ed Immigration Portal, Immigrants Rising, and Informed Immigrant. I go to these websites all the time. So if you have not met with me one-on-one before, if you met with me on one-on-one before, you probably have seen some of these websites. I'd probably share these with you. And so definitely check these out. We're going to send you the PowerPoint slides, or we're going to add them to the PDF document, the Google document with all of the different links. That way you can revisit this information, but check them out. If you are someone that's trying to become an entrepreneur, thinking about like how to generate income, Immigrants Rising is an amazing, amazing resource. I know Andrea and Juan, who are our life after college consultants, they will refer to them as well, just because they themselves have benefited from some of their funding and some of the work that they've been doing. So definitely check these out.
We can do a big session.
Okay. If folks are not talking, then we'll break it up. All right. No pressure here. Okay, so my questions to you all are, which terms are new to you? Like, based on what you just heard, what are some things that are new to you? And were you surprised by any of this? Feel free to use the chat. Raise your hand.
We have some in the chat. I think, yeah,
Oh.
you said the AB terms. I had heard of SB, but not AB. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, sorry, I was gonna say we'll have opportunities throughout the year. We do collaboration with some offices and centers around civic engagement. And of course, this is a midterm election season coming up this November. So you're definitely going to be seeing a lot of things around civic engagement. So there's always going to be opportunities for you to, one, learn more about how laws are passed, how do you work with your representatives, or even just advocating to your local representatives. But you'll also learn more about, like, what are the current bills that are being pushed at the state level. We do have a government relations office, and of course our associated students, who we are really close partners with, that do a lot of work to highlight state initiatives that could impact undocumented students. So for example, this past spring semester, we were advocating for this bill. Oh my God, I forgot the name. It would essentially reduce the 3-year requirement under DACA down to, not DACA, sorry, under California Dream Act down to 2, right? And so we had been behind it, writing letters. We had a couple offices write letters as well, talking to our representatives, kind of giving examples of how by reducing the 3-year requirement down to 2, like how much that can help some of our students. I don't think it actually got the final vote, but it got pushed pretty far into the assembly and the house as well. And so even if the law doesn't pass this year during the actual law making season, groups will always come back to it for the following year, right? And I think for us to be aware of what's happening at the state level, and if any of you are living through that experience, that can say like, hey, I want to give my testimony. I want to let them know how this is impacting me, right? And other people like me. So there's always space for us to be able to do that advocacy whenever we see any of these assembly bills or senate bills being introduced. Yeah. Even this spring, we saw like the expansion of Medi-Cal, right? Like healthcare access to non-California citizens or non-California residents. So this would be undocumented folks. Also the expansion of CalFresh, which is a big basic needs program for folks who need access to food. That was also expanded to undocumented folks. So yeah, so there's a lot of things you can advocate for. And there's a lot of spaces where you can do that too. Anyone else? Any other terms or anything that you were surprised by?
Yes, we have AJ. Sorry, I lost it. Oh, I see. AJ said California Dream Act loan and business licenses laws. Adriana said AB 130, AB 131. So did Alexis. Diana mentioned the laws that protect us, so that's cool. Elizabeth shared professional and occupational licenses. Sharon said the internship information. Claudia mentioned what surprised me was the evolution of all the help provided to students and how we are now studying at this time are getting so much more help than what they offered 20 years ago. So yeah, it's big.
Yeah.
Hilda mentioned professional and occupational licenses. Sorry, Anna, did you want to add?
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, and lastly, we have Vanessa that shared, as a Chad major, I found it really relieving to know about professional and occupational licenses.
Yes. Okay. I am glad that that is definitely something that is giving you some sense of relief, right? Because again, it's normal to feel anxious about what your future is going to look like, right? If it's nerve-wracking for folks who have a social security number and, you know, residency or citizenship, I know that it's, you know, just as bad or even worse if, you know, when you don't have a stable immigration status that's going to allow you to really plan for the long term. But for me, what's important to walk away with is to know that if you want to get that degree, if you want to get that certification, you can do it, right? Nothing says that you can't do it. But what could be challenging is the money. And so tomorrow we're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about resources, right? And so I think ultimately now at this point, as we move forward, we just got to keep in mind that if you can access the money, right? All these other things, we can open up doors or we can create those doors for ourselves, right? Yes, it's all about the money and we all need money. And so, yeah, okay, any other comments? Because I'm looking at the clock here. Oh yes, the work permits are a pain to deal with. Oh my God, tell me about it. I'm in the middle of that right now, every 2 years, which means the need of renewing everything else every 2 years. Yeah, it's draining. I know right now I'm going through the renewal of DACA, and I know it puts me in a dark place. And so, you know, if that's you, I see you, I hear you. It's rough, but you know, I also recognize that not having DACA or not having solutions can also be just as rough, if not even more. But there are definitely options, and can't wait for you to meet other folks who can share that. Okay, I heard how they might be able to help financially. Yeah, so when it comes to the fee around DACA renewals, we have had financial aid assistance during the regular academic year, because usually we only have it available for 1 year at a time because we have to ask for funding every year. But in the past 5 years, we've had funding for DACA for the most part. We are going to be exploring other ways that we can expand immigration fee assistance because, you know, again, we recognize that there's other things like TPS renewals, et cetera. And so what's it called? The phone is going off right now. And so we'll go over some of that, some of the details regarding like renewals and resources to renew later on. But for the most part, like I said, when it comes to just knowing what you have access to in terms of like being able to exercise your career goals, or being able to just start getting ready, you know, just developing professionally, there are definitely ways that you can go about that. Anything else that people would like to add on about this portion of things? All right, will there be a way to check? Yes, so we can check it one-on-one of what, okay, but one way that you can take a look at to see if your non-resident tuition exemption has gone in is by looking at how much they're charging you. If they're charging you over $4,000 or $5,000, you're definitely getting charged out of state. In-state tuition is about $3,000. Let me look it up real quick for you. Tuition.
Actually, it is below 4,000, exactly 4,000.
Exactly 4,000. Okay, let's take a look.
Or $3,995.
That sounds like they're charging you the in-state. You can also see it if you look at your account, your student account, and you look at the different statement lines. If you see like that one that says minus out-of-state tuition fees, then that's because they charged it, they processed your in-state tuition. Another way that I would describe this is kind of like a credit. So the 8540 affidavit, the way that I describe it is like a coupon, right? So they're not really saying we're now declaring you, you know, paying in-state tuition. We're just saying that by submitting this, now we are going to discount the out-of-state. So you'll still see it on your account, right? But we're just discounting it. So that's another way that you can tell.
Okay. Yeah, I see it right here, $3,951.50.
Perfect. Yeah. And so I'll drop the link for the tuition and fees, but I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow. I won't ruin the fun for you all right now. But I'll drop the link to that page so you all can take a look at that information. All right. Okay, y'all. Any questions before we wrap it up today? All right. Evelyn, Alexis, anything y'all like to add?
Not really. Just thank you for participating on today's workshops. It was really fun. I really enjoyed this, and I hope all of you learned at least something from this workshop, and that you learned something amongst each other from that first workshop that we had. And again, please check your emails. If you have any questions, please let us know via email or call the office number. And yeah, thank you.